What's going on, everybody? Dottz Gaming here, and today I'm bringing you guys a video explaining why it is a terrible idea to parse PvP builds. Now, I know to a lot of players who are maybe intermediate or veteran players, obviously no, you never do this, but a lot of new players maybe don't know that it's a bad idea to parse PvP builds, because I cannot tell you how many times I have gotten questions on my videos. Dottz, what does this build parse? How much damage does this do in a parse? Or I'll have people come to my stream. Dottz, I parsed my build and parsed yours, and my build looks higher in a parse. Does that mean it deals more damage? And it shows, I think, maybe people don't understand how build interaction changes a bit when you go into PvP. I've gotten a lot of questions too. Are highly crit-oriented sets super good in PvP? Why do people think that they're not? And I think explaining why PvP is different than PvE in terms of kind of how damage works a little bit, I think will go a long way to explaining, especially the main point of this video, and that is why parsing PvP builds is essentially a very useless thing to do. Now, there's two main things that play into why you don't want to parse a PvP build. The first is Battle Spirit, and the second is the impenetrable gear trait / critical resistance. So we'll start with Battle Spirit. Now, Battle Spirit is a buff that you get on your character whenever you go into PvP. It's why I always get asked, Dottz, how come your health is so high and my health is so low? It's because of the first line of Battle Spirit. Your health gets increased by 5,000 when you walk into a PvP instance. Now, keep in mind, it's not a flat 5,000. It's also going to be increased by your CP by a percentage. So do keep in mind that it's not like, well, I have 20,000 outside, I'm going to have 25,000 inside. It's not like a direct just addition like that. There's also percentages that get added in from CP, from various passives on your character, etc. You can check out my build checklist video if you want to kind of take a look at what some of those passives might be. Also, damage taken, healing received, and damage shield strength are decreased by 50%, which means that your damage is being reduced by 50% against enemy players. Something to keep in mind. Also, if you're watching this post Greymore, the healing received will be 60%, but for the purposes of this video, that's really not, we're not worried about that. It's mostly, we're talking about the damage taken part. And then also the ability range of 28 meters or more are increased by 8 up to 36. So just an important buff to keep in mind, especially the damage mitigation part, that 50%. There's also another factor that we need to consider, and that is the impenetrable gear trait or crit resist. So impenetrable increases your critical resistance by, at the moment, it's 258. Once Greymore is released, this will be lessened, and you're going to also have a base critical resist. But again, for the purposes of this video, that is not the point. The question is, well, why is crit resist such an important factor? What does this matter? So when you are out in the world and you're in overlanes, if you're in a dungeon, enemy monsters cannot deal critical damage to you. So it's basically your damage getting boosted by a certain amount and dealing, let's like any other MMO, a critical strike. Your attack deals extra damage. Now, like I said, overland mobs and bosses cannot deal that extra damage, only players can. Now, wearing something like impenetrable is extremely important in PvP because it reduces the amount of damage those critical strikes deal, and it also, so, you know, you basically take less burst damage from your opponents. And the reason that this is so important for when I say don't parse PvP builds, because you might be wondering, how does this tie into the whole parse subject, is because critical has so much more value against a target dummy, because that target dummy doesn't have any critical resistance. It's why when you see people hitting these super high ultimate numbers on people, like, you know, like I hit a 21k leap that I posted on my Instagram a couple days ago, it's because there's approximately a 0% chance that guy was wearing any impenetrable, because if he was, he would have dampened the attack that I dealt. That critical hit that I landed would have been dampened by that impenetrable. But if you are in like attacking like a mob or something, right? Or a target dummy in this case, a target dummy is going to have 0 crit resist. So your crits are going to be dealing way more damage against that target than they would be against a target in PvP. If you also take into account the fact that people in PvP can have higher resistances, they have that battle spirit damage mitigation. It is simply, a target dummy is not indicative of what actually fighting another player is like. And to prove that, I am going to show you guys an example of if I was to test a certain skill loadout on a dummy, it looks better, but if I test it out on a player, it's actually worse. So let's go fire over to my guild house. Alrighty, so we are now back at my house where I have a couple of different target dummies where I'm going to be showcasing this concept. So we're going to be testing 2 different skill loadouts with the exact same gear and the exact same condition. So I am going to be testing what deals more damage per second. My Engulfing Flames, which just gives me a flat 10% damage increase once I'm buffed up, or Inner Light, which gives me 7% additional maximum magicka, if you include the magicka from Inner Light and the passives, as well as Major Prophecy, which is going to give me a 10% critical increase. Alrighty, so I had to put a jump cut here because unfortunately it took me a little bit longer to get a friend to come help me do the PvP testing, so huge shout out to Katara for helping me out with that. I was going to do the dummy parse and then do the player parse right afterwards, but unfortunately it took, like I said, it took me a couple minutes to actually get somebody to come help me. So what I basically ended up doing was I did 10 to 12 flame lashes with only my major sorcery buff, nothing else. And then if I had Engulfing Flames in my bar, I also used Engulfing Flames. But if I didn't have Engulfing Flames, then I just had Inner Light there for the passive buff. And it's to basically just demonstrate the difference of how, like, of how kind of crits act in a PvP or a PvE scenario. So my parse with Engulfing Flames on the bar on a target dummy ended up being about 12,000. Now with Inner Light, it ended up being 13,500. This was on a target dummy. So the parse on the target dummy with just Inner Light, as opposed to Engulfing Flames, ended up being higher. So if you maybe, like I said, are thinking that parsing is relevant to PvP, you might think, well, then in that case, Inner Light is clearly the better choice. But when you go into a PvP scenario, the difference is the complete opposite. It is so much different. The difference is actually kind of staggering. So if we load in my Inner Light fight against my friend and one of my moderators, Katara, only 1900 damage per second with Inner Light on. Only 1900. Okay, 1934. But we swap that to Inner Light, or excuse me, we swap that to Engulfing Flames, 3000. So in a PvP environment, Engulfing Flames is going to be the superior choice. Now, you might be wondering, like, why did you choose this as your comparison? It's because, like, that 5th slot a couple days ago, I was wondering myself, I wonder what's going to be better, the flat 10% from Engulfing Flames or the 7% magicka from Inner Light plus the Major Prophecy for more crits. I wonder what's going to give me the most damage over a time period. And when I kind of tested this, I came up with the idea for a video that I was like, I think this will be a good way to demonstrate how parsing on a target dummy where crit is definitely way more relevant is not indicative of a real PvP situation where critical hit, crits definitely lose their value and by comparison to PvE. And I thought it would make a really good showcase for a video to really explain to people that while crit is still important, it's good to have, and you're going to get your big hits from dealing critical damage, you can tell that it definitely doesn't play nearly as big of a role in PvP as it does in PvE. So I thought this was a really good way to demonstrate, guys, why parsing in for PvP is just not all that useful. Now, you might be wondering, okay, Dottz, if that's the case, how should I test out my builds? How should I test out my gear? And this is why PvPers always say we're poor and we never have any money. And it's because the best way to honestly test out your PvP builds is to just go out there and fight other players. That really is the best way to go test. Duel your friends, run BGs, run Cyrodiil, kind of see which sets and what gear feels best on your character and what you feel like you're getting the most damage out of. If you really want to break it down and get into the nitty gritty of everything, what I would recommend that you do is use the UESP build calculator. They have a kind of like a number on there that is either effective weapon power or effective spell power. So it basically like looks at all of the different damage sources that your build has and kind of gives you like an effective damage number for your build. And if you really want to get into the nitty gritty of comparing certain sets, I would absolutely recommend that you use that to kind of see, okay, you know, what's the difference between maybe if I want to use Hundings or Shield Breaker? What's the big difference between those two sets damage wise, assuming that I want to run a similar amount of recovery or something. Like I use that when people were like, oh, Dottz Hundings is infinitely better than Shield Breaker for my Stanblade. But when I ran through the numbers on that calculator, you know, when you take a full build into account, they're actually almost the same, you know, in terms of effectiveness. It's really, really similar. It just kind of, the variance is basically nearly nothing. It's a very like marginal amount. So that's basically what today's video is about, guys. Just showcasing why I think parsing on a PvP build is not worth doing. I hope that you guys were able to draw something from this. I know it was something a little bit different, a little kind of out of nowhere, but just with the amount of comments that I've been getting about this recently on both my stream and my videos, I thought that, you know, if there's a bunch of people leaving comments about this, there's probably a lot of people who aren't leaving comments that are also wondering about it. So hopefully you guys found this interesting and found it helpful. If you did, I'd appreciate if you smacked a like on it. Any questions or any comments, please feel free to leave them below. I'll do my best to get to your questions. And of course, guys, subscribe with that notification bell on to keep up to date with everything that I post here on my YouTube channel. So thank you guys so much for stopping by. Very much appreciate it. As always, I'm Dottz Gaming, and I'll see you all next time.